guys, Julia here. I want to extend a quick thank you again to everyone who stopped by my booth at BookCon on June 1st and 2nd. It was amazing talking with you guys and meeting you guys and sharing stories. It was just absolutely incredible. So thank you guys who were there. If you weren't able to make it, that is perfectly okay. You can live vicariously through my vlog, which I will link up above. Definitely check it out because it was an absolute blast and I had such a good time. So the topic of today's video is going to be something I've wanted to talk about for a while. It's going to be some tips for how to write a good short story. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Julia, you've only written full-length books. Why are you giving advice on short stories? And the reason for that is I've actually written short stories for a very long time. If you weren't able to see my video from a couple weeks ago, I actually was traditionally published by Z Publishing in a collection of suspense short stories, which you can buy on Amazon, so I'll be sure to link that down below. I love short stories for a variety of reasons. They are very different from a lot of the larger books that you'll see on shelves, but like they're almost little pockets of characters and intrigue and world building and all that. And sometimes if I'm busy or something, I have a bunch of different collections of short stories that I like to go back to and just read, and it's nice that you sometimes don't have to have a full-length story. Sometimes it's really nice to just have little small pockets of individual stories that you can kind of immerse yourself in and then take yourself out of without the full dedication, I guess, of several hundred pages. Short stories aren't for everyone, and that's totally fine, but me personally, I get a lot of little cool ideas that I'm like, oh, that's really cool, but as I start looking into it, I'm like, I don't think that has the full potential for a full book, at least not yet. But I really still want to write it, so it turns into a short story. So if you've been following my blog for a while, you'll see now and again I post short stories on my blog. But I wanted to give some tips today, so hopefully you can write some short stories of your own. So tip number one is something that I've tried to do in a lot of my short stories. It's to have a phase or a change throughout the story. The easiest way to do this is to pick an emotion that you want to start your short story in, and then an emotion to end your short story in. So a lot of mine are creepy or suspenseful. So a lot of times my stories will say start in suspense and end in fear, or start in suspense and end in relief. Sometimes they'll start in calm and end on a shock or end on a cliffhanger. For romance, it could start in love and end in grief, or vice versa. There's a lot of different options you have, but that's a good way to make sure that there is movement throughout your piece and it's not static throughout. Because I feel like sometimes some of the short stories I read that don't really resonate as well with me, I find that they're staying on the same level the entire time and there's no change in emotion or change in characters or character arcs. Arcs are more difficult to do with characters in short stories because you have less pages and less time to tell the story of the character. So a lot of times it's easier to include a change in emotion, so you still include that fluidity in that shorter span of time. So my short story that was published in Z Publishing's collection is called The Lover's Box, and it starts in playfulness and humor, and I guess you'll just have to wait and see how it ends up. It was a lot of fun writing it, and I hope you guys enjoy reading it, so don't forget to click down below to pick up your copy. My second tip for writing a short story is more of something to consider, and it's to consider what format you want your short story to be. One of the coolest things I think about short stories is that you absolutely can tell it in the traditional style of prose writing, but it gives you an ability to tell it in a different way. I wrote a short story, a very short story, only a couple hundred words, called Voices on my blog, and you'll see it's from the different like arguing voices in someone's head, you know, like when you're trying to make a decision and you seem to have two voices going back and forth in your head. I wrote it from that perspective, and I used bold and italics and normal font to tell the differences between the characters and what was going on. For a long story, that may not necessarily work, and I didn't think it would work, and that's why I created it as a short story, but in that little pocket of conversation in that moment, it worked really well, and it gave the reader something interesting, something to look into and try to figure out and piece together who's talking, what's going on. I also wrote another short story recently that I don't want to talk too much about yet because I might be doing something more with it, but it was told in the form of a chat room, and I thought it was super cool. I had a couple people read it because I was just really excited about the concept. It ended up coming out really well, so I don't know where that will end up along the way, but consider if your story or if your concept would work in a non-traditional short story setting. That's just another way that you'll get your reader interested and another way to keep your reader engaged if you're doing something interesting with the formatting or with the style of writing. It doesn't have to be traditional setting because you don't have to sustain it for a long period of time. Sometimes odd formatting and stuff is cool for a little bit, but then it gets kind of annoying to read. For short stories, it doesn't have to be that long. So if you have a cool concept that you want to include but you don't think could sustain itself for the full length of a book, then it's perfect for short stories. Number 3 tip to consider in your short story is how long you want it to be. Length itself doesn't really matter in short stories. I've written short stories that are a couple hundred words, and then I've written short stories that are 7,000 words. Generally, I would say the limit for short stories is considered to be 7,500 words. The 7,500 to 17,500 word range is considered a novella, and from there you'll get into all your normal levels of books. So you have between 0 and 7,500 words to work with. So it's up to you how long you want to continue your story and how much you want to include in that. I know a lot of books that started as a short story or as like a contained little small thing, and the author came back to it years later and realized that there's more potential and then expanded it into a full book. But when you're just writing a singular short story, it doesn't have to be a lot. So just consider the length that you want to go for, and even if it's just a couple hundred words, it's still a story. If you're telling a story, then it's a short story. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Last but not least, tip number 4 for writing a short story is to try something new. There may be a voice in the back of your head telling you that it's too weird and it doesn't make any sense, or it's too complicated to tell in a story, and that's just not true. If you have something in your head that you believe can be told in a story, it absolutely can be told. It might just take a little bit to get it just right, but it's a lot less daunting to work on a smaller scale of a couple thousand words than to work on a giant 50,000 to 100,000 word manuscript. Start small and take it one step at a time. Try something new, try a different length of a story than you're normally used to, try a different formatting than what you're normally used to. Mix it up, and sometimes trying something that you never thought you could do ends up in the best type of work. So I hope this helped you guys today. If you have any short story ideas or things that you're working on or any tips you'd like to share, feel free to leave those in the comments below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on short stories. Thank you for stopping by. Bye!